Welcome to Roots and Ruminants, your podcast for creative and innovative use of farm, pasture, and rangeland. We're going back to the basics of raising and grazing livestock, growing your own forage, and practical land use.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Roots and Ruminants. Jared and I are once again back with another guest. We've got Rob Dowdle with Dowdle Family Farms. Did I say Dowdle right?
Yes, you did.
And we were saying before we started recording that he's definitely the most southern guest that we've had on the podcast. He's from Steens, Mississippi.
Yes.
Steens,
yes, I am. I'm
with
glad.
an S.
Yeah,
right?
Steens with an S. Yes.
All right. Which is, you also said you get about 20, you've had 22 inches of rainfall for the year?
Yeah, the USDA's rainfall for the year said that we've had 22 inches so far year to date, which is a bit. It's about normal, but for us, it's kind of dry on our farm, actually, in our county. But and I was just telling them I was a little embarrassed to even admit that because y'all seem to have, that much in a year if you're lucky. And
Jared had 10 yesterday or 2 days ago.
Well, yeah, isolated parts of the area had 8 to 10 inches, which led to some massive flash flooding in our area.
Wow.
So yeah. Anyway, but yeah, that's our ground is definitely not meant to take that much. 2 to 3 would get the creeks really a flowing around where we live. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah. So that's just
go ahead and
that just
describe
blows my
Steens,
mind.
Mississippi to us. We have mostly our listeners are probably in the upper Midwest and Midwest of the United States. So talk through that area. Describe it as best as you can.
So I'm from Lowndes County, Mississippi. I grew up in Columbus. Steens, our farm is in Caledonia. I live in Steens. They're just little communities next to each other, really. I'm 5 miles from the farm and is where I live. We get an average of 54, 55 inches of rainfall a year. We tend to have pretty acidic soils, clay-based. There will be some kind of loamy stuff in there from what I'm told. But yeah, so most of the agriculture around here is corn, soybeans, some cotton, not quite as much as there used to be. And then, of course, cattle. Very few pigs, goats, sheep. I mean, they're smaller producers that are doing those. And then, of course, a lot of hogs in confinement, chicken, poultry, that kind of stuff as well. But
Jared, didn't you spend a little time in Mississippi?
I did. I was just looking at the map here and looking at it. So I was in the way southern part of it for a summer down at work for a place called 7L Angus with Jimmy Levins. I was in Gulfport, Mississippi when that was backing up our purebred Angus operation. So, and then they moved the ranch up to Wiggins kind of towards the end of the summer. But,
oh, wow. Yeah, that's even Wiggins. That's still pretty far.
it's still on the. It's very, very coastal plains. A little different. Yep.
Yeah, still very different, but
Yeah.
good to.
Yeah, I enjoyed my time down there. I this is where I learned from the Louisiana neighbors and the guys that worked at the ranch that if you live north of I-10, you're a Yankee. You're not a real Southerner, which is crazy for someone that lives north of I-90.
Yeah.
So what I said, what happens if you live north of I-90? It's like, well, you're a dang Eskimo. It's like, yeah. Well, that's probably true. It's fair.
And I'm not sure that most of your listeners would hear my accent. I've been told that it's rather distinctive, but I'm not sure that most of your listeners would hear my accent and consider me a Yankee either. But,
Right, I know. But if you ask the good folks on the border of Louisiana down there,
that's right.
You're a
that's
northerner.
Exactly what they say. Yeah,
you're a
that's
northerner.
Right.
It was good. I loved it down there, but I couldn't get over a couple challenges that were very new to me for the first time in grazing systems, and I'm guessing that you have some of these challenges too. One is that you can let your grass get like too old and rank and mature, and the cattle won't want to eat it. Right, like Bahia grass, it's 4 foot tall, and like if we have grass and the cows can walk in it, they're gonna do great. They're gonna do fine, whether it's dormant grazing or winter grazing or whatever. So the idea that there would be grass that's extremely productive but that unpalatable was kind of a foreign concept to me.
Yeah, and that's and our area is a tad different in that we can grow compared to southern Mississippi, we can grow a lot of fescue.
Yeah.
I think y'all had the guy in Missouri. I can't remember. I'm horrible with names, and I'm going to mess y'all's names up. But you had a guy on in Missouri
Yeah.
several months back I was listening to. And, you know, especially the toxic fescues, Kentucky 31, or any of the newer varieties that have kind of gotten into that toxic endophyte over the years. You know, those are so challenging to graze, at least in a pure stand of it,
Yeah.
that it's kind of weird. And so yeah, we've got a lot of grass right now, but like you were saying, it's not outstanding forage, and I'm out here trying to grass finish cattle on it, which is where a lot of our cover crops, my cover crops anyway, come in, at least as it relates to cattle, the ruminant side of our operations.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was good. I enjoyed my time in Mississippi. I loved the food. I liked the people. It was good. It was it wasn't there was a fair amount of similarities between South Dakota and Mississippi, I thought, you know. He didn't have the presumptuousness that you get sometimes from some of the bigger states, you know, that are more prominent. I don't want to
Yes.
make fun of Texans, but I'm talking about Texas. You know what I mean? Like there's like this down hominess, you know,
Yeah.
to South Dakota, and this you know, sense of realism and just genuineness that I recognized, kind of coming from one small state to another.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Iowa comes in second to Texas.
I feel like I've made enough enemies just now by mentioning Texas in a not so great light, and I wasn't really actually meant to be offensive to any single person or even Texans. It was just there's a difference, right? If you're from a place like Iowa or Texas, you get a little, you know, you're a little prouder of it for the most part, it seems like, and when you're from South Dakota and Mississippi, it seems like you're a little bit more of a humble person.
You know, my older brother, Dade,
I don't know.
I hope he doesn't hear this. I'm going to open a can of worms here, but he moved to Texas years ago, and now he considers himself a Texan.
Oh,
And I'm like, Dade, you live in Houston. What's so good about Texas? First of all, they're flooding right now, but not that. It's just, you know, there's, like you say, there's some kind of general pride that people have in their particular states or in their areas that it's great to have, but
yes, it is.
it still seems a little, I don't know, like they're better than us somehow
Yeah.
or another.
Yeah.
But anyway, who knows?
Anyway, so I feel like Mississippi's like a cousin to South Dakota in that regard, to the Dakotas. We kind of have those neighboring states that, you know, it's a little bit difficult to be a neighbor to Iowa and Minnesota and Nebraska sometimes, you know. They've got a little bit more to brag about.
Yeah,
They got a little bit more to
Nebraska.
brag about.
Yep.
So, anyway.
So Rob,
All good.
you always lived in Steens?
No, so I've lived in the area. I mean, I grew up in Columbus. Again, we're talking about a distance from the house I grew up in to the house I live in to our farm is less than 15 miles radius or diameter in any direction. So we're talking about a very short distance there. But I realize out west in some states, you know, you go from community to community and it may be 50 or 60 miles apart or 100 miles apart, but here it's, you know, much shorter. In 2000, I went to, when I went to college, graduated from high school, went to college, graduate school, more graduate school, and then moved to South Georgia for, to work there. And, Osceola, Georgia is where I was, Irwin County, near Tifton, that area. And then moved back home for health reasons and other things in 2017. So we've been back here almost 7 years now, and started messing around on the farm again. And yeah, so that's what I'm doing.
And it's the family farm that you moved back to?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Our farm is the first note that we have of paying taxes on the land was in 1826. Now, all of the land that currently my dad owns was not owned for those 4 years. Some of them he's kind of gathered from other family members. But all that to say, since 1826, we think it was 1824. And so I'm the seventh generation of our family to have a farm on the land. When my dad, he's a veterinarian by trade, and so he bought the farm. It meant a lot to him, and when he was growing up, and he had the opportunity to purchase the land when he was just starting a family. That's always a great time to purchase land, um, when your money's really flowing and you're having a lot of kids and that kind of thing. Sorry, sometimes the sarcasm doesn't come through. When we first get married, we start having kids, and money can be a little bit tighter than sometimes when we start, getting a little bit older and more mature and a little more established. But that's what he was also buying into veterinary practice and that kind of stuff at the time. But and so the farm up until when he purchased it, at this point, most of it was either in timber or cotton farming. So single species, and so he over the years he converted, with the help of his three boys, converted a lot of that into pasture, fenced it in and started grazing it with cattle. So that's before then, his granddad is who, he kind of got the land from, and his cousins, but it was a little bit more multi-species at the time, not quite to the extent that it is now, maybe, and not like it was a generation or two before. But they did have, cows and row crops, and his dad actually owned a cotton gin. His mom and dad owned a cotton gin in Caledonia, so that kind of played a role there as well. Um, so that's kind of where we got where we are now. He planted fescue in some of those pastures, and yeah, that's where oh, that's where we are now with the cattle and pigs and so forth, and bees.
Cattle, pigs, and bees.
Yes. So I moved back to the farm in part because of health in 2017, and like an idiot, I started with chickens and all that other garbage. Not garbage. Chickens aren't garbage, but when people are just trying out chickens are one of those things that it's fine to have a dozen or two in your backyard. I had 150 of them, and for there to be any egg layers, and for there really to be any kind of scale, you got to operate at a scale of a dozen or two or 1,000 or more if you're going to have them on pasture. Just offset the time, energy, labor, money cost, and that kind of thing. And then we wound up getting some pigs. And at the time, I was still finishing some grass. I was grass finishing some cattle, which is a challenge in and of itself. I'll come back to in a moment. But I had somebody dropped off 4 American guinea hog pigs, and then from there, we now are breeding Berkshire, Duroc, Hampshire genetics and raising them on pasture. And actually feeding a substantive portion of their feed on pasture through our cover crops certain times of the year. For the last year or two, my focus has been on, last year I didn't grass finish any cattle for a couple different health reasons and weather reasons as well. So we use our cover crops, primarily a warm season cover crop mix, sorghum, sudan grass based stuff, to grass finish our cattle on. Really hard to do with fescue. I don't know if it can be done with fescue, but that's just my ignorance probably. And then raising the pigs on that as well. So that's kind of where we are now. We brought honeybees 4 or 5 years ago. And that, you start off with 1 or 2 hives, and then the next thing you know, you have 100 or more. And you're always doing the work with the honeybees when you're trying to, farrow pigs on pasture and plant cover crops and all that kind of stuff. It tends to be pretty chaotic in the spring around here. But
there's a lot going on.
What are you doing with the bees? Like, how do you get the bees started? What do you have to do to the bees in a certain season? We have bees up here. They're all seasonal. They come and they go, right? We see them put the boxes out in the spring, pick them up, take them to California in the fall. How do you get your bees going for a cycle, or what's that cycle look like in the beekeeping?
So we keep our bees here year round. Mostly, this is just my understanding of how it works in y'all's area. But most of the 99% of the honeybees in the U.S. go to pollinate almonds in California and up the coast. They'll eventually wind up in Washington or other states pollinating fruit crops, or whatever else. So, and then a lot of times they're overwintered here, in the southern states, or moved Southern California, and then that cycle starts all over where they're building them up for almond pollination. I think that normally starts late January, early February, in that time frame.
Yep.
Here, we keep our bees here on the farm year round, so we don't have that. We're kind of outside that commercial production area, and there are a lot of apiaries in Mississippi that will keep them here year round. But we're talking about apiaries with a couple hundred hives, not apiaries with thousands or tens of thousands of hives. Although I do know some beekeepers that do that. So, in January, February, our bees are building up. They're coming out of winter hibernation. Their hives are at their smallest. The clusters, fewer population of bees, maybe a few thousand, maybe 10,000, something like that. And then we'll have a few trees. Red maple, particularly, is the most important for us in late January, early February. It was mid to late February this year because of the weather. But the honeybees will start building up their hive populations there. And then they will come on in kind of April or so, once we get some privet hedge blooming, and then tulip poplar and some of those other trees. That's where they'll really start putting on their honey reserves. And a hive can 10 frame. I mean, anyway, it can put on 150 pounds of honey in a good year if everything's managed right. I don't always manage them right, but they can put on 100 pounds of honey or more, just in that few week period if everything's managed really well. Last year we had a really late freeze. This relates to kind of some cover crops. We had a really late freeze, and our honeybees don't work cover crops during the spring. We've overseeded pasture with several clovers and all. And every now and then you'll see them out there, but for the most part, they can go to a tree and get. When you think of a tulip poplar, for example, that has over a teaspoon of nectar in each flower, and they're covered with thousands of flowers, they can go to that, keep going back and forth there. It's much more effective. Last year, we had a late freeze that killed most of the tulip poplar, cut back a lot of the blooming. A late deep freeze, 20 some odd degrees, which is really cold for us. That's nothing for y'all. And so our buckwheat, our honeybees work buckwheat. I mean, they lit it up. And now we only had 10 acres blooming at a time, 5 to 10 acres blooming at a time, but it was in a rotation that lasted several weeks. And so that actually saved our honeybees last year, kept us from having to feed them, which normally in dry weather we have to feed them. But once we get into June, July, there's really not much for the honeybees to forage on. Yeah, they'll do some stuff with soybeans, but that's for 2 or 3 weeks. There's a little kudzu, but the main nectar flow for us is in March, April, and first part of May. And then they're just trying to survive over the course of the summer. And for me anyway, the late summer is a lot of times harder than winter for us with honeybees. But anyway, I don't guess honeybees are ruminants. I got a little sidetracked on that one. Sorry.
No, I'm actually fascinated by the honeybee conversation. If we could park there just a little bit, Justin, is that okay?
No, it's fine with me. But
how do you feed the bees? So how do you know when the bees need to get fed, and what are you feeding them?
So, the hive population peaks in May or June.
Yeah.
For us, and then there's very little for the bees to forage on. So you've got a lot of bees hanging out. They're flying around trying to find stuff to forage on. You can tell when honeybees are coming in. They'll come land on the landing board. They'll come into the hive. You can tell that they're heavy. You can tell when they're bringing in pollen. But for us, we just know that, even if they get stuff into mid or late July, which is rare, there's still just nothing for them
Yeah.
in July, August, September, October.
Okay.
There may be a little bit of stuff. So once they stop, and you can look when you open a hive, you can open up and see the actual frames that come out of the hive body,
Mm-hmm.
and you can tell whether they're bringing much in or not. Usually, they can bring enough in to survive, but not enough to build. A lot of times, I haven't done this in 2 years. Did not do this last year, and I'm probably not going to do it this year. But a lot of times, I'll split my colonies in the summer. And if I split them, I will feed them just because they're lower in population. There's not as much food reserves. And usually just a 1 pound of sugar with 1 pound of water, or a gallon of water and 8 pounds of sugar. That's a 1-to-1 mix. That's the honeybees will have to kind of dry out the syrup that you get out of that. Later in the winter, most people, if the hives, I keep my hives in a 10 frame deep hive, and I'll overwinter like that. Most people try to overwinter their colonies in 2 deeps, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But mine are a little bit smaller when I overwinter them. I found that they do well, but if they're light, if they don't have quite enough food reserves going into winter, then I will in the fall feed them that same sugar ratio, same syrup, but I'll increase it to 2 pounds of sugar to 1 pound of water, make a kind of a thicker syrup out of it. The catch is when you do that, you've just got to make sure that's not that hive. You're not harvesting that stuff for honey. I mean, you can, but it's not real honey. But typically that's just in the brood chambers where I'm doing that if I have to do it. But so far, I haven't really had to do it. Even last winter, they did so well last summer, or early last summer on the buckwheat, and I did not harvest honey, so I didn't have to feed them. Even though we had a real dry fall, so it kind of worked out pretty well there.
How does the honey differ from one crop to another? Because I've heard like buckwheat honey is really dark and clover honey is a little sweeter. How does that differ? But then how come when you go to the store and you buy honey, it's pretty much all the same, like generically at a store?
So, a couple things. A lot of times when you're buying honey in a grocery store, it'll be adulterated with high fructose corn syrup, not high fructose corn syrup that's fed to the bees, but high fructose corn syrup that's mixed directly with the honey.
Okay.
How can that happen? Isn't there like a law against that? Shouldn't there be a law against that?
How can you buy beef that's a product of the USA that is raised, slaughtered, and processed in other countries?
Yeah, that's true.
You see what I'm saying? And
we specifically passed a law at one point to make that clear that we could do that. So it makes sense.
Yeah. As long as it's broken up into other stuff.
For the process.
And a lot of times, there are labels that, like in Mississippi, honeybee producers are supposed to say, independent producers are supposed to sell it as 100% pure honey. But somehow that label often is not seen in the grocery store, 100% pure. So I don't, it's that's a whole,
it's another thing. Yeah.
And I could get off my little area of specialty there, but it's kind of weird how that happens.
I did not know that you could, without putting it on big bold letters in the package, just add corn syrup into honey and throw it on the shelf.
Yeah, huh. And if you look on the ingredients list, it'll say honey.
Yeah.
There have been several studies done. I don't remember the exact numbers, but a large percentage of honey tested that was labeled as honey and only honey for the ingredients
was
blended with corn syrup.
What? We just can't have nice things anymore. What's going on?
Yeah. That's that. I'm gonna say something that I probably shouldn't say here if we keep on down this road. But that's part of the problem. To me, that is the most important reason for people purchasing something local. Like I sell my honey for $10 or $12 a pound, which is expensive. you go to the grocery store, you can buy a 24-ounce bottle. What's that? A pound and a half? I'm not good at math off the top of my head, but that's about a pound and a half, and it's $6 or $8. Um, but but that's but you don't know what you're getting. Same thing with beef. I mean, if you purchase ground beef, you don't know where it's coming from. You don't unless you purchase it from a local producer. And it's a anyway. Yeah, I'll stop there.
No.
I better not delve into that too far.
The things we wanted to talk about, though. I mean, I'm on your website now, right? I can go to Dowdle Family Farms, and I can buy bees, and I can buy pork, and I can buy beef, and all kinds of stuff, right? So that's your business has been a response to some of those passions that you're mentioning, and providing these products.
Yeah, and so, the reason I moved back to the farm was for health issues. I had ulcerative colitis. Long drawn out story, but I was trying to reduce inflammation and had some really good success with a couple different practices, a diet change for one, and then another thing that I won't mention at the time being just some treatments that I read the research on, tried myself against, or my doctors did not advise it, but I did, and it worked really well. But that said, there's a in that process, it's, to me, it seems so surreal. A consumer who cares about what they eat cannot look at a labeling package in a grocery store and be certain of what they're purchasing, whether the beef is from the USA, whether it's, grass fed. I mean, grass fed doesn't mean anything when it comes to ruminants. I mean, and it's, and I'm not saying that all meat has to be grass finished. Actually, we grain finish and grass finish beef on our farm, both for different reasons. But the thing is let's just be honest and direct about it, and let's not try to hide behind some kind of label or minimum quality standard. Is my approach. And
totally agree. And I think it's again, not a value proposition either way on which one should or should not be happening. We don't finish our own animals. I'm 1,000% positive all of them are going into a commercial feed yard, getting grain finished. But we should probably make it so consumers, if they want to buy this, that we don't keep cheating on the rules every time we try to tell people like, hey, this is what grass finished means or grass fed. We shouldn't just fill that with, okay, they got some earlage, and technically there's a husk of around the corn, and they had grass at one point in their life, and so now we're gonna. Again, like every which way, but let's be honest to consumers on what it is. It blows my mind that there could be high fructose corn syrup in honey without showing up in the label, and I 100% believe it, because I can see how it'd be super easy to cut. They're interchangeable ingredients. You could say that you're putting in there for various reasons, but that's wild to me.
Yeah, and I had a customer one time. She purchased some honey, and she said, "Hey, you put sugar in your honey," and I said, "No, ma'am, I did not." I said, "That's honey granulates. You bought some fall honey, goldenrod, buckwheat, that kind of stuff. They all crystallize very quickly." And she said, anyway, she wound up wanting her money back, so I gave it to her. Well, not 2 months later, she purchased an order from our website for beef, pork, and more honey, and I just canceled her order. And the thing to me is if you cannot trust what I'm saying to be realistic in terms of how I produce something, if you don't believe me, I don't have it. I don't have anything. It's not that I'm angry. It's not that I'm operating on trust. That's part of the reason why I do our YouTube channel. I show folks the good, the bad, and the ugly, the times where I'm an absolute idiot in some of the farming practices that I do, and times where I succeed as well. And I don't try to do it for the drama's sake, but just to communicate with people who actually care.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's one of the things that I think is so tragic, is people no longer, for the most part, are able to actually see what they're getting, what their farmer's producing. And most of us work hard, no matter how we produce it. It's not like we're sitting at home, eating bonbons and watching soap operas all day, or whatever the case may be. It's anyway. I got off on a soapbox anyway. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was.
Some really cool stories about honey being used like, medicinally, other than just eating it on a piece of toast. Like it curing lots of different things, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't know,
So
putting in your
so
eyes and things like that, and obviously eating it when you have a cold. And what are some of those things that you've heard or know that is true on that side of
let me
things?
preface what I'm about to say is I am not recommending that people do what I'm telling them that I have done.
Perfect. This is great. I'm glad I asked this question.
So don't do anything that a lot of people use honey, and honestly honey, yes, it's got little bits of pollen in there. Yes, the bees, the foragers, they go get the nectar, they bring it back in their, for lack of a better term, stomachs, just to make it a little easier. For my point here, they bring it back, pass it to another bee that takes it in and puts it in cells, and then they do their little bits to dry it out, and cure it. So it goes from mostly, oh gosh, I forget what nectar is, but it's the vast majority of it is water, and then they bring it down to about an 18% water. So I mean, they kind of inverse, instead of being 5-to-1 water to sugar, now they bring it back to basically 1-to-5. Did I say that wrong? Anyway, hopefully y'all get what I'm saying. But my point is, and in that there's a lot that happens, a lot of enzymes and stuff that I don't understand the science behind it. But and so there's a lot of value, and people say, in local honey. One of the things that people talk about is the value of pollen. And I'm just going to warn you, you can try eating pollen, but I'm just warning you, don't eat a whole tablespoon of it at once, or you'll be ready for a colonoscopy after the fact. It is, you'll hear people talk about how you can consume pollen for allergies and stuff, and maybe you can, but it can also be a really great colon cleanse if you're not used to it. The thing that I've found to be most interesting about honeybees to me is the more that I'm stung, the more I find benefit in terms of allergy problems, sinus issues. Honeybee stings create kind of and there's a lot of people that talk about how they're used for medicinal purposes, the actual stings. But I've noticed that the more I'm stung, the fewer issues I tend to have with allergy and sinus problems. Again, it's all anecdotal. Yes, there are severe issues that people have with, bee stings, but it's kind of like capsaicin is used. Have y'all ever had herpes zoster virus? What's that called? Not chicken pox.
Cold sore?
No, it's I shouldn't have said herpes zoster because now anybody's thinking of is herpes.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Hey,
Definitely.
one of y'all let me Google that and think of the name, because I'm going to have people thinking that when I
No, it's shingles. So you're talking about that shingles?
Yeah, shingles. Sorry. So when they have shingles, a lot of times they'll use capsaicin. The burning in the capsaicin, I mean, it burns the ever living fire out of your skin on those sores. But once that burning subsides, it alleviates a lot of the pain. And in a similar way, I think bee stings help a lot, not just with allergies, but even with inflammation type issues, which is what ulcerative colitis, what brought me back to the farm is. It helps with a lot of those type issues. And so it's the bee stings to me are the most valuable part of having the honeybees to begin with. It's strange, but really kind of fascinating. But again, I do not recommend anybody do that. And if you do it at your own risk. I will gladly state that my philosophy in life is, if you're going to be dumb, which I often am, you also have to be pretty tough. And and that's kind of my approach to things. But
that makes sense. My great grandpa was a beekeeper, and my grandpa would tell stories about him having arthritis in his hand or his thumb, taking a bee and making him sting it for that inflammation to go down.
Yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of an anti-inflammatory response. That's and a lot of things do that naturally. Human parasites do as well, but that's anyway. We won't go down that road. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we should. So there's a lot of, just because this happened a couple days ago, Justin. So when we were heading to your place, and one of your daughters had a little scare, thought maybe it was appendicitis, right? Going to the ER. Hope we can talk about that. Uh, the girls were asking like, "What's an appendix do?" You know,
Yeah.
and Katie and I were conflicted because our what we were taught, Justin, if I'm not wrong, like conventional was the appendix is a useless organ that serves no purpose whatsoever. That you just as well take it out of your body right away because you don't need it. Right? That's like in the '90s and early 2000s. That's what we were taught about what the
Yeah.
appendix does. Right? And then I remember a couple of years ago when can't think of the name, but Brett Weinstein and Heather Heyer, the most recent book they had here, kind of about homeopathic, you know, responses that a lot of indigenous cultures use. I can't think of the name of it. Find it later. They were talking about the appendix as one of the chapters in the example they were using, and they were talking about how appendicitis is virtually a non-existent thing in indigenous cultures, right? And how the importance of the appendix is in repopulating gut flora, gut bacteria, things of that nature. And
Oh.
and so when like Katie Googled it, uh, that's what showed up. It was like, oh, the appendix is a repository of beneficial bacteria that can repopulate the gut bacteria, that kind of thing. It was like, well, that's even changed mainstream like in 30 years. If Google would have been around 30 years ago and you'd have Googled it, I'm sure it would have told you what we were told in elementary school and high school, which is the appendix does nothing. You just well take it out. We don't need it at all. So it's interesting how, I don't know, we're picking up on things. And like, oh,
Yeah.
no one was talking about their gut flora, their gut, biome 30
Yeah.
years ago. Not at all.
Yeah, it's really analogous to soil health
Mm-hmm.
and other things. It's just amazing what we don't understand, and even now, as well as we understand things, we still don't. 20 years, 30 years later, we'll look back and think, "Man, what were we thinking?" As a society, not just as
Yeah.
individuals.
So yeah, it's okay. So honey, bee stings, a lot of good stuff. We got to soil health. Can we
Yeah.
can we make the transition now into finishing feeding hogs and cattle? Let's start with cattle because we talked a little bit about the hogs. Let's go to cattle. You said that you you know will grain finish, you will grass finish. You've got to have certain tools to do so. How long have you been working on this grass finished product, and what's the evolution of it from when you started to now?
Um, so I've been working on the grass finished stuff since I moved back to the farm almost 7 years ago.
Okay.
The first beef I bought from my dad. And split with a guy. We did halves, had it taken to a facility, and we did not get our meat back. That's a whole nother process. That's a whole nother issue for the day. It's probably good because that was not a very well finished animal. Some of it that we got back was, but we got bones and stuff that weren't ours. Um, and what one thing I found is even with, and that was a grass finished animal, but most producers who've been around cattle their entire lives do not know what a good finished animal looks like, even if they're trying to use grain to do that. I'm just now getting to the point where I do, and I'm not trying to make it. This is more of a statement of it's not that people are. It's just we haven't done it in so long, for so many years. We've got a generation or two of people who are just taking them to the sale barn when they're of weaning weight. And so it's easier to do with grain. The main reason I grain finish animals is 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, I guess, when COVID and all that junk was going around, beef supplies and all. Somebody asked me if I could finish some cattle. I said, yes. They said, but we don't want grass finished. We've bought 3 grass fed cattle and they're not, we spent $2,000 or $3,000 on an animal. We don't want grass fed cattle. It's nasty. And I said, okay. So, and I keep them. I still rotate them around on pasture. And I typically for the grain finishing, I'll put them on pasture and I'll feed them about 4 to 5 pounds of grain per head per day. Not enough to really mess up their rumina, but enough to give them kind of that excess, put on a little bit more muscle, a little bit more fat. And then in the last 3 weeks or so, I'll increase that that amount of grain the last 3 weeks before the processing date. Sometimes a month. It just depends on how the animals look. Those are for the grain finished, and so there's so much poor grass finished beef out there, or grass fed beef, that there are a lot of consumers who do not want to mess with any kind of grass fed, any kind of grass finished product, because they've had so many bad experiences. I mean, we're selling our animals right now. They're going to be these next group. They're going to be nearly $4,000. You add $500 or $600 in processing. When you spend $4,000 or $5,000 on a supply of beef for a year, when that is a product that you can't stomach the fat on the ribeye, I mean that's who wants that kind of garbage? And so I try to kind of modify that in a system that is a little bit more, conducive for our environment on our farm anyway. On the grass finished stuff, I didn't do any last year. We didn't have the grass. I had a major abdominal surgery for the second time, July 5th of last year. That was part of it as well. But you've got to have really good grass. Fescue doesn't finish cattle very well. Most of our pastures are poor soil health. We cleared some kind of scrubby land 10 years ago. My dad cleared some scrubby land for pasture, and the soil health there is just really, really poor. We planted cover crop, sorghum sedan grass based cover crop this year on it. But and that's where I think some of the cover crops, particularly sorghum sedan, I mean, it is an absolute outstanding forage to finish cattle on. Yes, especially if you get some of the dwarf varieties, daylight photosensitive period, the PPS varieties and stuff. You can do a lot of work in terms of not hay. After the frost kills it, graze it. Do what?
Never mind.
I can't think of the. You can come back and graze it over winter. After it dies and the prussic acid leaves. Stockpile grazing. Sorry, I couldn't think of stockpile grazing. My mind's kind of scattered.
All good.
But I say that, and yes, those varieties work really well for stockpile grazing, especially in our area where we don't get a snowfall. We don't have some of the crazy weather. We don't have some of the crazy weather that others do. But just in sheer terms of soil health, a long growing season for warm season cover crops like sorghum sedan, I mean, we can get I planted in June. I planted this crop late last year. I planted it in June and grazed it 4 times. And this sorghum sedan grass was thick, tall, 6 feet tall. And I grazed it with pigs most of the time and then cut it the last time. But, when you can get 4 grazings out of a warm season cover crop, that it just produces so much more material that's so nutritious. And the cattle, if they've got the frame size already, their growth rates, they can gain a lot really quickly. And so that's the easiest thing for me to grass finish cattle on. It produces a good product, and I don't have to worry about some of the other stuff that they're the performance issues that we'd have in fescue and all.
How do hogs graze 6 foot tall sorghum sedan grass?
Surprisingly well. It depends on its growth. So, on sorghum sedan, first of all, hogs aren't going to perform on sorghum sedan. It's obviously they'll get some sugars out of it, but most of the cover crops that we grow for the hogs, it starts off with buckwheat. With hogs, the nutrition issue tends to be the right amino acid profiles. When you're trying to get an animal from conception to slaughter in 9 or 10 months, and they can grow from conception to slaughter in that amount of time. 300, 325 pound, 350 pound live weight. We've got to have more nutritious feeds, and the lysine levels particularly tend to be the most limiting thing with pigs on pasture, because we're trying to feed them a non-animal based or non-animal byproduct diet. Buckwheat, even though it's only 14% protein, whether you're feeding the plant or the grain, um, you're dealing with about a 5.6% lysine as a percentage of protein. So it's really nutritious. There are some issues with light colored hogs being sunburned and all that kind of garbage. But when you mix a lot of the higher protein feeds, cowpeas, I've done mung beans once, one little small patch, and I actually grazed it with cows. But mung beans, from what I understand, are really good. I just haven't used them yet. But cowpeas, buckwheat, your forage brassicas, they tend to get a better balance of the essential amino acids that they need to grow, and they'll actually put weight on. Most pastured pigs, they'll eat a ton of grass, but quite frankly, they're not gaining weight on the grass. Yes, they get some phytonutrients. Yes, they'll receive some other nutrition from them. Yes, it increases the quality of the pork and everything else. But in terms of actually weight gained, most producers will, most pastured pork producers will feed 20% more grain than any kind of confinement operation, because the pigs are moving around, they're regulating their own body temperatures and that kind of thing, and they're not getting any nutritious stuff from pasture. Now, I have not done this with a full batch of pigs from utero to finished weight yet, because I don't have my system down. But there are times where I can still have, without sacrificing hog performance, I can feed 70 to 90% of my hogs' diets on good quality cover crops. But that may only last for 6 to 12 weeks at a time. Then I have to increase their grain and then bring them back again. Now, going back to the sorghum sudan grass with pigs, sorry, I got off on a tirade again. Sorghum sudan grass is, I always include it in our mix, just because in terms of soil building, the root exudates with sorghum sudan grass are absolutely phenomenal. And it improves the quality of the pasture so much. The thing about sorghum sudan grass, when you're green feeding it, the pigs will graze it, they'll eat it, but they're mostly doing it for the fiber if you've got a pure sorghum sudan grass stand, and you're free feeding grain. Animal performance will suffer on sorghum sudan grass with hogs if you reduce their grain consumption much. Probably the best way of feeding sorghum sudan grass to pigs is after getting 3 or 4 grazing cycles of sorghum sudan, whether it's cows or pigs, whatever. The stand tends to, as it's going into winter, it tends to kind of thin out, and you get thicker stalks on the sorghum sudan grass. And if you let that die, man, pigs, at least our sows anyway, and I would do this mostly with larger pigs, 150 pounds or more. Seekums are larger, but I typically do this with our breeders. They will tear up. I mean, they'll absolutely destroy a sorghum sudan grass crop. When you get those big sorghum stalks that cows will do for some of the sugars, but I mean, pigs will annihilate it. They do really well on it. But it doesn't substitute a whole lot of feed. But it's, like I say, it's a great thing when you're trying to limit, nutrition for sows that don't need to get too big too fast.
Yeah.
Early gestation periods and all.
So what else are you using for hogs from a diet standpoint, right? So using turnips or things like that. That they can dig up and eat, or
purple top turnips. Hogs don't really enjoy purple top turnips. They love the greens. The turnips they don't. The cows will eat the turnips that the pigs leave behind, like the actual turnip ball.
Really?
That's the crazy thing to me.
Huh. That is kind of wild.
I had I moved our steers that were feeding out over where my breeder pigs are, and I had them on a cereal rye, Austrian winter peas, purple top turnips, daikon radish, rape, a couple other things, a couple clovers. I forget exactly which ones. I think those were the ladino clovers. But anyway, and I moved the pigs in there. The thing that they left, they ate all of the daikon radish roots, the radishes themselves, blew my mind. They ate all those. The only thing they left were about half of the purple top turnips. I moved the cows into the paddock adjacent. And anyway, I just gave them access to that because grass was growing up and I hadn't planted it yet. The steers came through and ate all the dead gum turnips. It boggled my mind that the cow, because you would think, hey, the pigs will eat this and cows won't, but it was vice versa. I do add here, we are so hot and dry. I think y'all can mix warm season and cool season cover, what I call warm season and cool season cover crops. A lot of those will kind of overlap a little bit more with y'all. For us, you get 2 or 3 months, 4 months of 95-degree days. Even like dwarf Essex rape or some of those forage brassicas that'll handle more heat, if they're in with a taller cover crop, they'll perform okay, like in a mix. But they still can kind of suffer some. But in our warm season mix, we do, I'll wait until July or August to plant the daikon radishes. And even purple top turnips, they just don't form much of a root and don't perform quite as well until we get in July and August for us, from what I've noticed anyway. Our cool season crops that pigs do well on is, people talk about clover all the time, and it's a decent crop for pigs. But it works best when mixed with some brassicas. Cereal rye, especially in early vegetative states, are good. Peas. Gosh, my mind's going blank now. Of course, we'll do 4 or 5 different varieties of clover to try to mix up some of the amino acid profiles. In the summer, our warm season stuff, I'll still add the dwarf Essex rape and even purple top turnips. The turnips don't form much of a root typically. If I planted them today, they might, because days will start getting shorter pretty soon. But they just kind of barely survive under that sorghum Sudan grass, sunflower, okra kind of canopy there. But yeah, sorry, I'm rambling again.
No, it's okay. We asked about your cover crop mixes. You're helping explain it. That was good. That's good. Do you use the buckwheat do you use the buckwheat as a forage source for cattle as well, or do you mostly have it for the hog grazing mixes?
So in the hog, it depends. Yeah, I'll do it. I typically will add buckwheat in most cover crops. If I've grown cover crops there before, I'll add the buckwheat. If it's really poor performing soil, I don't do any soil amendments. I may add the equivalent of 5 pounds of nitrogen per acre if I've never grown cover crops in an area before, just to get the sorghum Sudan grass started. But typically, I don't even do. This year, I haven't done that. I did last year. And the buckwheat, I mean, it'll shoot up and grow, 3 or 4 inches tall and then start flowering. It just, in soils that we haven't grown cover crops in before, it doesn't do much. So I'll add a little bit in new fields. I usually add it at about 8 to 10 pounds per acre if I plan on grazing cows in there. And it's really not, the cows will graze it, but it's really just more for the phosphorus benefits and the roots for that. In pigs, I usually graze it. I usually plant it at its full rate for a full stand, 50 to 70 pounds, usually 50 pounds per acre because it's easier to calculate. And the thing is it's such a one and done crop that by the time I turn pigs into it anyway, it's already gone to seed, and the sorghum Sudan grass at that point is starting to take over. So it typically does not hurt sorghum. And where we are anyway, it doesn't hurt, the performance of any of our other cover crops typically. And offer some shade for the brassicas as well. But I'm only doing it at such high rates just because I want the forage for the pigs, and most, it is the best crop I've grown for pigs to graze, as long as they have other stuff to eat as well.
Do you then rotate back to a cash crop on those fields?
No, so we don't do any cash crops per se. When I'm grazing with pigs, if the buckwheat has gone to seed, they'll miss most of the buckwheat seed. Pigs will root up, and I mean I try to get a rotation so that they're not really taking the sorghum sudan grass down too far. This year I'm trying bringing cattle after I move the pigs off to graze the rest of the sorghum sudan grass down. I mowed last year. I mowed it, but even if pigs are left in a paddock where they kind of moonscape it, the sorghum sudan grass regrows from the roots. It blew my mind when it did that. I didn't understand that it would. I always thought you had to leave 6 inches above the soil. It takes it a little bit longer to recover, but it does regrow. I mean, bare ground and sorghum sudan grass will regrow, assuming the weather's right. The buckwheat will reseed itself. When I get the animals off of it, they miss. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's gone to seed, they'll miss the vast majority of the seed, and it'll reseed thicker than what I actually planted it on. It's wild. As long as we get a little bit of rain, or if I irrigate it just to get it started. And then, the cowpeas, depending on the variety, the Chinese red or red rippers will grow back. The others don't. So no, I typically am not planting anything behind the warm season stuff. All of our cool season stuff, when the pigs get on it, they tear it up and it doesn't regrow at all. It's those are one and done crops, but I can reseed them or something similar.
Mm-hmm. I never thought about the buckwheat being such an early maturing, such a fast, crop to go to seed, that it actually is able to grow up, go to seed, reseed itself within the cycles of how often you want to graze your sorghum sudan grass, which is
and that's in large part, I would assume that's just because of our context. I mean, we've got we can grow sorghum sudan grass we can plant it in April all the way through. It's better late April or early May, but I mean, even the 1st of April, I planted my first stuff this year, and I mean, we can grow. We don't get our first frost until sometimes November 15th is our average where I am, I think. Sometimes it's as early as October, but sometimes it's as late as mid-December. So I mean, you're talking about a 6-month growing window.
Yeah,
that it's
8 months. Yeah,
and especially when it's planted that early, as long as there's not a frost, the buckwheat will germinate and grow faster than the sorghum sudan will. And if the sorghum sudan grass is grazed really hard, like mowed off at the ground with a lawnmower, weed eater, or grazed down that hard with pigs, cows, whatever, it takes it another 30 days to recover usually, which gives the buckwheat time to go on and at least start flowering. And the forage on buckwheat is just as good as or almost as good as the grain is. So it tends to work. It's not perfect with pigs, but it works pretty well. It's just a lot of it doesn't pencil out on paper very well, but a lot of times you can make it work quite well. That's why I love buckwheat. It's just it's a great soil builder, but it's also such a diverse crop to graze. From what I understand, sheep and goats graze it. I don't have a whole lot of experience with that. And cows will graze it some, but they're not going to love just a full field of buckwheat, I wouldn't think. But,
Jared, you know what time it is?
Time to play the game?
Yeah, we got to play the game.
Okay.
So we haven't done a graze it, rent it, harvest it out for a few episodes. And I have a few of them saved. But this one, I think we have to make it more in line with what we have for options to graze, right?
Yep.
So, and things that we've talked about. So here are the 3 fields that you have. Okay, and you have to choose to graze one, harvest one, which you can hay it, you can chop it, you can wrap it for baleage, whatever, and you can rent one out where you're just punting. Okay. Mm-hmm. So here are the 3 fields, Rob, and I think because of this episode, you get to choose the species that you want to graze it with, and the species that you would feed it to after you harvest it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay. So here are the 3 fields. We got field of sorghum sudan grass. You got a field of tulip poplars and a field of buckwheat.
So so the tulip poplars, the honeybees would obviously graze. Oh, not graze, but they would forage the flowers there. Yeah.
Can you tell us what a tulip poplar is? Does it make a fruit
tree.
or not?
It's a big tree.
Okay.
Huge tree. So it is. Oh, I forgot. Y'all don't have tulip poplars up there.
No.
My goodness. Oh gosh, I feel like an idiot for not explaining that. So it's a fast growing tree. It's a deciduous, but it's kind of I think it's known more as a softwood, but they grow real tall, 100 feet or more, real fast growing. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I didn't explain that. I'm sorry about that. So yeah, the honeybees would love and I'd also run pigs under the tulip poplars as well, cycle them through, but that's a whole nother story. The buckwheat, yeah, I'd graze that with pigs, or I'd try.
Well, you can only graze one field.
I can only graze one.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. Okay, so I graze it, harvest it, and rent it out.
Yes.
Man,
one field has to be grazed. One field has to be.
I knew this was coming, and I was hoping y'all would forget. I would. Okay, I'd harvest the buckwheat seed. That one's pretty simple.
Oh, all right, okay.
The grain
for the seed
on it. Yeah. So I'd harvest the buckwheat. I would use pigs on. I would. Well, harvest hay or grain. No, I got to rent something.
You got to rent one out.
Too.
Which one is your least favorite?
I don't know. Man, this is tough. So yeah, I would probably harvest the grain. I would of the buckwheat. I'd let I guess forage would be the way it would be handled with the bees on the tulip poplars. And then let's see. I guess I'd rent out the sorghum Sudan grass. Nobody around here knows how to hay sorghum Sudan grass. That's the problem with this deal. Neither do I. We don't even do hay, or don't make it. But I think that's what I would do. Did I answer that right?
Which one are you doing? Graze it?
I don't remember. Okay, so I would probably hay the sorghum Sudan grass. It's the only thing that's going to be worth haying.
All right.
No. I said I'd rent that. Goodness. I don't know, man. This is a tough one. Okay, I do the honeybees grazing or foraging on the tulip poplar is hands down the thing there. Okay. Nope. I'd rent the tulip poplar. That's what I'd do with it, and then I'd graze the buckwheat and hay the sorghum Sudan, or have somebody hay the sorghum Sudan. I think that'd be the way to go there.
There you go. There's no right or wrong answer. So
no, I know, but
whatever
that's the
you
thing.
think
It's such a challenge though, because it's like those are just very different systems. We don't hay, and custom grazing is not really a thing here that I'm aware of. Like, it's such a foreign concept. Yeah, that's probably how I would do that, but I don't know.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I don't know how to use the tulip poplars, so I'm renting that one out.
Yeah, that's the thing to do, because it can be, people will use tulip poplar for lumber, but
there you go. You can rent it out to that, right?
But if it's rented, it could be done for bees. It could be rented out for hogs underneath. It could be rented out for a variety of different purposes. And that's why I would switch to that, and then probably graze the buckwheat and hay the sorghum Sudan. Graze it with pigs anyway, and do sorghum Sudan with hay. because that'll produce a lot of hay.
Yep.
Good hay too.
It will.
But,
perfect. Well. So what we want to make sure that you get to give Dowdle Family Farms a plug as far as where people can find you on a website, Facebook. You said that you have a YouTube channel. How do people learn more about Dowdle Family Farms?
By far the best way, if you're just looking for what we're doing on our farm, youtube.com/@Dowdle Family Farms. The last year or so, we've done more. It's mostly about pigs. A little bit of, we don't do much beef stuff on there just because they're much better beef producers. We've got some cow stuff this year and pig stuff as well on those videos, along with just typical, I got to fix this piece of equipment stuff that every farmer deals with, and then on our website, dowdlefamilyfarms.com, that's mostly more of our commercials, not commercial sales, but our retail sales for our beef and pork there. So
perfect. That's awesome. Well, this has been fun. We hit some things that we have not talked about or discussed with any other guests, with the honeybees, and certainly your area is extremely unique to our listeners. And so that was fun. I appreciate your time to hop on here and discuss with us all things that you're doing with your farm. So it's been awesome. Appreciate the time.
Well, I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast because, and I listen to others, but as well, but it amazes me that we'll feed hay 3 to 4 months out of the year sometimes in our environment where it's not uncommon for us to have a 60 or 70 degree day in the winter, a lot of 60 or 70 degree days, very little snow. Now it is wet most of the time from January on, but it just boggles my mind, and it's kind of challenged me to move forward a little bit more effectively with year-round grazing. I mean, if we can't do it here, nobody can really. I mean, we need to up our game a good bit. But
yeah, we had Graham Finn on from Alberta, Canada a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
and
that's
they're
the one
doing the same thing, trying for the same thing, grazing 365 days a year. And so it doesn't matter where you're at. I mean, every place has a little bit of a unique challenge, whether it's you're saying you're too wet some years and sometimes they're in the season, and he's too cold and has too much snow. But obviously you kind of work through those things, and you use your crutches a little bit too often sometimes. And hay is sometimes that, but sometimes it's just necessary too. And so,
well, for us, hay is so cheap. It's not necessarily the best of quality hay, but when you purchase a bale of hay for $35 or $40 delivered, that's real cheap. You don't have to worry about putting it out. But at the same time, our biggest challenge to that is we have fescue pastures that produce most of their growth in the fall, and our falls tend to be real dry unless we get a hurricane coming through the Gulf right up in our area. And that's why we had a drought. We didn't get any rain to speak of from August to December last year, and we needed that fescue to both graze and stockpile for the winter. And we got to sort out some different grazing systems, I think. But anyway.
Well, that's the other thing too that probably comes into this whole discussion, and we've had this with other guests as well, as when it's cheaper to feed purchased forage, then do it. You know what I mean? Like, obviously there are some very awesome conveniences as far as grazing livestock and keeping them out, and the health side of it and just the practicality of it. But land's expensive too, and sometimes it just may not work with the system and the timing and the economics to do that. And so if your farm is a business, you got to make sure that you're penciling it out and look at the economics of what it all means to.
That's right. And that's why we buy the hay. It's just way cheaper. The $3,000 or $4,000 a year that we spend on hay, or $6,000 like last year. We can't maintain equipment to hay, to produce hay ourselves for that kind of price. There's no way. But anyway.
So true. Perfect. Well, this has been good. I once again, certainly appreciate the conversation. It's been a blast listening to you. So thanks for the time, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. Take care, Justin.
Well, we hope you enjoyed another episode of the Roots and Ruminants podcast. Let us know what you thought of it. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those social media things. And, if you ever have any questions, just give us a call. We've got a toll-free number here at 888-498-7333. Be glad to hear from you. Thank you.